Hi, Dr. Shaw. It's lovely to have you with us this morning. Welcome to Mauritius.
Thank you.
So you live in Melbourne,
Australia, yes.
And so you have a doctorate in education and from the university in Melbourne.
Yes.
And we're so honored to have you with us because
thank
you wrote a book about positive teaching, Teach Positive. And
Yes.
when we went through it, Shannon and I were both so inspired by all the pearls of wisdom that we can, get from the book. And
Thank
so
you.
when the opportunity came up to meet with you, we so wanted for our listeners
Thank
as
you.
well to get a share of that. Can you maybe introduce yourself? What is positive teaching? What you've been doing?
Of course. Well, it's rather awkward because I think I was in the classroom for 30 years, not that I'll give my age away, but unlike many educators, my passion was being in the classroom. And eventually I became a principal, and very hard when you're passionate about the profession of teaching not to want to put your mark on it. So I eventually went into academia and also into writing. But then the exciting thing is that I started my own school. And again, I'm back with the passion for the children and the parents and living the best life in the classroom. So the interest in positive psychology came about because intuitively I've always known how to relate to the children, and I've intuitively known that all of the best academic results and personal results come from the way I interact with my students. And I have a lot of experience in observing outstanding teachers. And I've always been aware that there is a fundamental love or joy or compassion and passion that underpins great teaching, a lot of which has historically been seen as intuitive. It's just kind of the way you are. When I first heard about the work that Martin Seligman and Chris Peterson were doing in the field of positive education, the joy for me was that they announced that it's possible to put the science behind what I used to call the secrets of good teaching. So the issues around relational aspects of encouragement, of not giving up on kids and being there for them. What started to emerge is that the actual neurological science behind how kids' brains work when they're in a classroom, very happily for me, confirmed what I had always done and what I think top teachers have ever done. So we went from the field of intuition and started to back that with the science, which is absolutely mind-bogglingly powerful, because our book was very tentatively looking at things like relationships being more important than the curriculum. And people say, well, how can that be? Well, it can be because we know that if a child feels valued and seen and known, the neurological potential of their brain opens up. So to say it's just a nicety or it's just, being kind is not the case at all.
So teaching happiness is backed up by science. There is evidence.
Yes, a particular relational aspect, the positivity is, and I guess it needs to be said that for some of us who are old enough to remember, and from our own anecdotal experience, some teachers are mean, and they're cruel and they're punitive, and they exercise a level of fear which some cultures and over time has looked as though it's effective, because you can have 40 kids all sitting there not moving, doing what they're told, and looking as though they're learning. Maybe you prime them to write exam answers the way they should, but the research shows now that that kind of atmosphere in a classroom does not benefit the children's learning in an optimal sense. So it's awkward to think that there's been a history of teachers standing on a pedestal in classes with a cane and, you know, humiliating students, maybe with the best intentions, but now we know that that is not optimising educational outcomes for children. So that's my background.
Can you tell us about your PhD?
Sure. My PhD thesis is a bit odd, but it does fit in with what you're doing at Dukesbridge in terms of the voice of students was very important to me, how students see their teachers. And I know that from going to Dukesbridge, as soon as I got out of the car, I could see happy children who said hi. I can see on their faces, and there's a noise that you pick up of joyous children. So I collected for my PhD 1,000 thank you cards and letters that students as little as grade 2, right up to university level, what they'd expressed in terms of gratitude, one-on-one, very personal notes. And very rarely was it exam results. It was mostly, I did well because you believed in me, because you cared about me. Really naughty kids said you didn't give up on me, you know, when you could have, but you hung in, you know, and the jokes and the football commentary and the knowing if a child was upset not to pressure them, sometimes a hand on a shoulder, sometimes not even looking at a child. And the research for my PhD was contrasted. The letters, what the children valued was being known and being valued and being encouraged. And I contrasted that with the government policy on education and also academia. So problem with educational academics have often not spent 30 years in a classroom. In fact, somebody who I wanted to come and teach at my school, he said, oh no, I wouldn't go into a classroom. And he's a very, very highly regarded academic on teaching skills. But, you know, you've got to get right down on the ground with the kids and look at their faces and do that eye thing. And that's what the children notice. The education staff, the policy writers in education also interested in being re-elected and perhaps having business support. But that again was light years away from what the children valued. Some of them were hilarious, but what it did, my PhD confirmed for me that the children value learning, but they value first of all the relationship with somebody who believes in them. And so the POS-psych certainly underpinned the research for my PhD, but the joy was having the clear voices of children coming through, and then the science of the positive psychology absolutely dovetails in with what the children said, which is a rare thing to have kids' voices. Some of them were hilarious, but it's a rare thing. It took a long time to be able to get the ethics approval because these were written as a personal you know, individual note. Yeah, there was a lot of changing of context and names, but the messages were just stunningly beautiful. And I think at one point, nearly all the children wrote love Susie, love, you know, whoever. And so if you doubt the notion of an attachment, you know, it's all there very clearly. Yeah, so that's been my life trajectory.
Jeannie, it must have been quite out there. You've said to me before that this goes really against pretty much what teachers are taught back in the day, to have this very much distant and authoritative kind of stance with their students. But from your perspective, all your research and everything coming out like this, and then bringing this into mainstream education, were you not fearful of being scoffed at by your colleagues or your peers?
Well, no, and this is where the science made it easy for those of us who are pioneering this kind of perspective on teaching, because there's two elements. One is that anyone who's been through an education system knows that great teachers have always operate on that level. Then we've got the science to back it. So personally, particularly in setting up my own school, I was very confident that the pushback would come from people who didn't understand. My PhD research, where the children shouted from the rooftops, please do this in the classroom, please make us feel good. But particularly the science. So we might talk about this later, particularly the idea of seeing children as being in possession of wonderful strengths. In fact, when I started my own school, some parents would come to be interviewed and they would say, my child is gifted, and because they'd had an assessment. And I would say, well, all children are gifted. And the parents would say, but my child is exceptional. And I would say, well, all children are exceptional. They didn't like that at all, but that is my belief, that all children are massively gifted, and all we need to do is to apply the notion of acknowledging and recognising a child's strengths as being equally acceptable across the board. But the parents took a bit, it was the parents really, but we started with a flourish, the school's going extremely well. And the subsequent discussion around pedagogy and curriculum development and assessment it's evolving in that direction, I think. So I was pretty out there. Plus it helped that I'd been an examiner in the VCE, I'd taught extensively to exams, I'd run enhancement classes with the university, so I knew what the other side of it was, the rigour, designing assessment, trying to enhance students who needed more stimulation. So I was very much involved in bringing out the rigour, but not at the expense of the kids feeling inadequate. That's the worst thing. It's inhumane to do that, I think. Yeah,
I suppose there is a critical mind that people use to look at schools that promote happiness. And a lot of the times they will think, and hopefully it's a misconception, but they certainly think that there's less of an academic push, and therefore the children may not be academically bright if they spend too much time playing, having fun, just enjoying life. Please tell me they are wrong.
Yeah, well, they are wrong, because this is where the neuroscience comes in. And I think it's interesting historically, and I don't know whether you've thought about this with your development of your school, but at the very basis of humanity, there's two reactions. If you are exposed to danger, so you're about to be attacked by a mammoth when you're in the caveman science, your whole being focuses on protecting yourself, escaping, and the brain actually closes down. It's a bit like the flight and fight thing. It's you can't be worrying about the flowers all around you, because you have to protect yourself. and the brain closes down in terms of survival. Conversely, what we know now is that all of the innovative ideas around neurological expansion and capacity to consider various things flourishes when you feel happy. Now, there's no disputing that according to the science. So if a parent says, oh, it's all very well for my child to be happy, but that is not going to advance their academic standard, that's flawed thinking. Because the children who feel they can be curious and ask questions and think of new ideas, they're the ones that are going to be the leaders of the world, not the ones that are spoon-fed with examinations. So I think some of it, I think, is confidence, because the joy of the positive teaching is that you've got what we all know about how to develop the relational side of teaching, and now it's backed by very rigorous international science. So I think you've just got to be very strong, and the parents will come with you when they see. Just a very tiny anecdote. I was worrying about what you were worrying about, Rishi, at one point. So I went into the grade 1 class at my school, and I said to the teacher, I'm going to teach them Shakespeare's Macbeth. And so they all sat there, and I told them what the story was, and their eyes are dropping out, because it's beautifully, whoa, all this stuff. And I said, Lady Macbeth felt so guilty that she went, ow, damn spot. And I'm telling them, how the guilt got to her, and they kind of understood being naughty and feeling bad. And the parents the next morning came running in and said, they understand Macbeth, they're walking around saying, out, damn spot. But what's interesting about that is your belief in a lot of people would have said you can't teach Shakespeare to grade 1 kids, but I did, and they loved it. They just adored it, and they understood it. So, and only because they love me, and I'm on the floor with them, and I'm carrying on with all of this stuff.
It's the way you approached it and you
exactly.
delivered.
And I said, this is, mostly grown-ups learn this. And so all of a sudden they felt very important. And the parents were very grateful, really, that it was like a compliment for that their children would be able to understand a Shakespearean play. And that's been my experience around, it's actually a way of countering the worry about exam performance, because of great teachers have relationships such that even the weakest student, I had one boy, for example, who couldn't put an essay together, so his exam answer was going to be a disaster. So I said to him, look, don't bother with the question too much, but this is how you can talk about the theme of the book and the characters, and then round it off. And when his results came out, he got an A, and I said, whoa, Adam, his name was, I think it might be a mistake. He said, nope, got an A. But there was something in, and all the other kids said, he didn't even have a hope of getting through. There was something in the fact that I said, look, just go bang, bang, bang. And he said, oh, I can do that. And it was quite clear, and he did it. And the other boys were a bit cross, I think, because, he wasn't particularly good at writing. But I think there's lots of examples where belief in students, it finds a way of them being at their best. And, if parents query that, my view is, well, isn't that what you want? And
but also in your school, the one that you started, that was many years ago, and now a lot of those students have become
the NAPLAN results,
and the NAPLAN results
are very good. The children are confident. I retired just before I was about to set up a secondary school, a bit like you're doing. But then I realised I was nearly 70 and I was having my 10th grandchild, all of whom required my time. And because my surname is Shaw and I'm a grandma, I set up something called the Shaw Grandma School. So I'm teaching very small people, in the same way, really. But that's my life's work now. But the children from my school are strong, confident people who are not going to look back. They're leaders, and that's all I can do. That's all you can do is make children believe in themselves. And if you teach hope, that's all you can do for the world, really.
Yeah.
There's enough other stuff to drag us down.
Yeah, isn't that the truth?
My theory around this is it's about confidence, and you mentioned that. It doesn't matter where the confidence comes from, whether it's through the positive teaching or positive reinforcement or a good environment at home, where they feel confident. Once you're confident, you're able to use that in all areas of life. So whether
Yes.
it's maths problem solving,
Yeah.
or climbing, I don't know, like some
Exactly.
gigantic
Yes.
thing
Yes.
physically, and it's really instilling this confidence in
It
little ones.
is. But the flip side of that, Rishi, I think, is the damage that can come from. We were talking with the staff yesterday about Fredrickson's work on the fact that laboratory tests show that you can be confident, and your parents can say 3 really positive things to boost your confidence, but just one negative comment from a student, somebody in the playground, a teacher. So we have to be extremely aware that constructive, positive feedback is ongoing. So you can have a parent who makes their child feel confident. And I've seen often in the playground somebody will say, "Oh, you're a know-all," or "You're the teacher's pet," or you look ugly, or no one likes you. And that can counteract really good parenting. And so I guess you need to be very aware that, and the research that's fabulous at the moment that I really, really like, and I don't think as when I was teaching I knew this so much, but when you give feedback to a student, because we are emotional people and we're naturally geared to be emotional, if I say, "Shannon, you must feel terrific about the fact that you've set up a school in Mauritius and it's getting wonderful reviews. Can you tell me how you feel?" And it's kind of not just saying, "I pronounce that you have done." You then allow the individual person to reinforce their sense of worth by saying, "How does that feel? How do you feel about that?" And we often, I think traditionally, you just give an exam or a test and just say, "Well, you did well and you didn't." But it's just how do you feel that you've achieved that is very important to counteract that negativity. Yeah.
Something you mentioned earlier, Jeannie, was that a person's mental state and how they are really affects their learning. And I just wanted to quote on page 88 of your just wonderful book. I have to read it so that I don't get it wrong. But say a person's emotional state has a direct impact on how they process new material, so we should pay more attention to eliciting positive emotions in order to improve our teaching outcomes. So what's the science behind that part? How can we?
It's interesting because the wellbeing science, the really cutting edge stuff that's coming out just as we speak, is being published, is around choreographing emotions in a classroom. So what has to happen is that just as traditionally good teachers would plan a lesson in terms of what the outcome of the lesson would be for the learning, and good teachers have always worked out, perhaps in 5-minute chunks, how the kids will be introduced to a topic, how they'll practice it, how they'll reinforce it, how they'll, pull it all together. And that's what we used to call, when I was training, good lesson planning, and you'd have a plan. Now, which is exactly pertinent to your question, Shannon, we need to think about choreographing the social atmosphere of the classroom. So yesterday we had fun not talking about the line of the birthdays. That's a deliberate concept to say, for the first 5 minutes, I'm not going to teach the grade 3 timetable or the grade 3 table. I'm not going to teach this spelling list. We're going to settle the children into a sense of being relaxed and happy.
So Jeannie, flipping over to page 94, you mentioned positivity blows both ways in a relationship. It's contagious and cumulative. Could you maybe explain that, because it seems like a polarizing statement in terms of the classroom?
Sure. And I can understand why you're saying that, but in effect, the notion of it being contagious, and they've done a huge amount of research around, the way you're smiling at me now is they call it a Duchenne smile. So what that means is a bit like we're programmed to copy your smile, and I will smile back accordingly. The contagion is such that we're geared to pick up the facial expressions of people that we're interacting with. The accumulative aspect is that you don't have to do that all the time. So when I walked into my classrooms, first of all, they'd hear the stiletto heels coming and they'd say, "Here she comes." And they would gear themselves up to know that it was going to be fun. They were going to have to work very hard, but I would be in there with them. So the contagion and the accumulation is really, it's really not polarizing. It's the tricky thing, I think, for new teachers, like you have quite a few at your school, is I call it what's in it for me. So the joy that I had of being in the classroom, I actually think would outshine what I gave to the students over many decades. So the notion of it being contagious, if you can walk into a classroom, particularly a naughty classroom of kids that, are going to try and jump out the window or something, the sheer joy of containing the emotions of that is fun, really fun. I've done some crazy stuff where I've had the kids all, we all sit around in a circle and talk about how wonderful life is. And one kid will say, "Nothing wonderful in my life." And I'll say, "Yes, there is." And they think, the sheer joy of that. I taught in a girls' school at one point where the girls would comment on what I was wearing, and then I would comment on how lovely they look. And suddenly, when you get to a terrific stage in teaching, you're utterly relaxed because there's no kickback. Those kids are with you, and if you ask them to do 3 hours of writing, they will do it, and they'll just turn up proud and say it's here. So the contagion is the sharing, the feedback. And there's a discussion around the the space between the teacher and the student, and it's that space which is magic, where I used to sit on the desk sometimes and say to the kids, even if I wasn't getting paid, I'd just sit here and chat to you. And that was true. And that's the pure synergy of teaching and learning that's very powerful. It's not polarizing, actually, it's unifying. That's what I think.
But something which is very bold, a bold statement, I think, in your book, I think it's a whole chapter. It's about relationships being more important than curriculum in a school. Can you maybe explain that? Because I think, it's like you're going to school.
Yeah.
Surely the curriculum is an important part.
Yeah.
That's not where technically people expect to build relationships or to learn about relationships.
Sure. The two are interchangeable. So clearly, every child needs to be proficient at maths and English, knowledge of the world, social issues, educational and employment opportunities. That's their birthright. And if it can be shrunk down to a curriculum, of course, every child must have that. But the science behind positive education is, and I guess Rishi, for your parents who want their kids to be brilliant at mathematics, brilliant writers, fluent in 3 or 4 languages, and the world's their oyster, that can only be optimised by the relationships. And that's irrefutable. So it's not a chicken and egg thing. It's not fighting the curriculum by imposing something artificial. The science is now saying, if you care about the curriculum, get the relationship right first. Otherwise, it won't matter how good or how detailed or how driven the design of your curriculum is. If you haven't got the relationships in place, that choreography of the social environment, the curriculum won't be optimised. And I think that's the message. And it sounds very bold in the book, but absolutely backed by the science, particularly the neurology. And, if you want to talk to your parents about how and we were doing it yesterday with your staff, a moment in time, there was a couple of your teachers who said their own maths teachers told them they were hopeless. And, how they remember that. So then if that maths teacher is trying to teach those young students and saying, well, you'll never be a good mathematician, that relationship is damaging that student's capacity to learn. So it isn't radical, it's actually logical. And I think if you talk enough about people's own experiences, it sounds radical, but it's actually not. And the science is there to back it.
And when you put it this way, it totally makes sense, because it's almost like the foundation, and you can't build a whole building or house without the relationships, because it will just go over their heads.
Well, or they'll be so afraid that their brain will shut down. Yeah. And if you growl at a child and say, you're hopeless, what did I say? Explain to me, you didn't listen. They've got no hope. Yeah. The whole thing is just seized up. And the fear and the humiliation and the shame is the most destructive thing you can do in terms of a child's learning. But as you said, for years we've had the chalk and talk and the discipline, which is convenient in a way, but it's not where the world and the science is going.
I wonder though if some of those older teachers, and I say older, but maybe they're not that old actually, but say for example, with those teachers that were mentioned yesterday in our staff training, yeah, when some of the teachers said that I had a maths teacher that said I was never going to amount to anything, yeah, or whatever, But I wonder whether when they get the notes written by the staff member going, well, look, I'm a teacher now, I wonder if those teachers would go, well, see, I knew it was my comment that actually helped you get there.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Well,
to that?
again, going back to particularly the Fredrickson work on affirming, positive affirming, the flip side of that was if a teacher said that, the answer would be, just imagine if you'd been encouraging. You know, she'd be a Rhodes Scholar.
Yeah.
So you can't say there, I shamed you into being
Into
a success.
excellence, yes.
Not logical.
I love what there's a table here about Seligman's perma theory of flourishing, and what I loved was, everything in there seems instinctual, but how would, say, a teacher who's got a serious subject to teach, say, something scientific or mathematics, we kind of, sorry for all the maths teachers out there, because we're kind of picking on it as if it's going to be the most boring subject. In fact, it can be riveting. But how does a teacher pull in from those flourishing techniques when they feel like they've already got enough on their plate with teaching, the actual nitty-gritty of the subject?
Well, again, it takes a kind of courage to think of that learning environment not as an add-on. And I think that's in your pioneering work at Dukesbridge. It's a complementary thing. So I know primary school teachers who go in to teach fractions with a bar of chocolate, that kind of thing, where, let's share, let's divide it into 8. And, there's hilarity around that, mostly eating the chocolate. But as soon as you do that, the notion of dividing something into 8's riveted. So to say, and really you could probably time how long does it take with the traditional chalk and talk as distinct from the dividing the chocolate up, you would find that the kids' notion of the fractions is time saving. But I think what we have to do is just not, and I think you guys are doing it very well, not see it as conflicting, and see it as, and I thoroughly understand, I've written extensively about how bureaucracy is putting so much pressure on teachers to document outcomes, and it's crazy bonkers stuff. It's really of no use to the child. In fact, it's causing teachers to resign because they're just working out data responses for the benefit of the politicians, I think, and taking them out of the classroom. And that is a disaster. I don't know whether you have it here as much, but there's an infinite amount of data to be collected. Children are not to be subjected to data collection. That is it's not human. We don't like it. I hate being appraised and assessed and all that. I just want to be, and that's how we flourish. It's an artificial thing to categorise kids into ranking, I think. I think that's not good.
So what's your take on exams for children? What's an appropriate age to put them through that process as opposed to kind of regular assessments, more informal?
Yeah, that's actually a key question. If you start with the negative notion that universities draw a line in the sand about what score in a final year exam they require for a student to get into a particular course, suddenly that becomes quite artificial in a sense. So, for example, to get into law or medicine in Australia, I think you've got to get 99.9 in an ATAR score. And I guess that's all right, sort of all right, if the university knows it's only got X amount of teachers who can teach that course and there's demand for X amount of new graduates going into hospitals or into law. It's sort of all right. But it's not okay for students in the sense that the damage around ranking. I don't know whether you have a similar thing here. We call it a state ranking.
So it's the percentile.
It's a percentile. So some of our children, for example, got 99.6, which would get them into any course probably they want to do. But that's relative to all the others.
Yep.
You're on a percentile. And the hugely damaging thing with that is in the past, and I think it's changing slightly. So, Rishi, you get 99.9, which you may have done at school, I think, from what I've read about you. But the danger with that is that that defines you. So you are a 99.9. You're a person who is 99.9, but only in a very narrow field. And then you might have someone who gets 32.2 because of all sorts of other reasons, and then they're branded as somebody who got an ATAR in the 30s. The problem with that is it flies in the face of future success, happiness, relational stuff, being a good dad, being a good mum, being a good doctor eventually. So the way I think about exams, and when I taught Year 12 literature and English, my kids were off the scale. They nearly all got A's because I taught them well. But it was a hoot, it was a joy. And I'd say, well, yes, but look, your jumper's dirty, or look at you, you've got a top exam, but look at you, you're not organised, or something like that. Pull them down a bit, because an academic result is not definitive of who they are. So do the exams, have fun with it, but don't ever think it defines you, because we're more than exam results. And once students think that that's all they are, it's not kind, it's not good, it's not human. So the exams can be a bit of a hoot. Like little Ellie can run really fast and you say, terrific running. But that's, that's not all she is. So that's the philosophy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we always say an exam doesn't define you and shouldn't define you. And so you're limiting yourself if it's all about exams. And I'm actually really reassured that some countries are moving away from exams. Countries like Singapore, which used to have this kind of obsession with exams at every level, they've realized that it's counterintuitive to the growth of the individual.
Sure.
And so they're starting to remove it from primary schools, which is amazing.
Absolutely. And I think I might have mentioned to your staff yesterday, when I started my primary school, no numerical assessment at all. And the children were assessed, if you like, on how kind they were in the playground or how brave they were to try something. And, if they worked out a mathematical formula, were fabulous. But I flatly refuse to have clever students and dumb kids, not having that. And because it's not fair. So, I would praise the children for being kind as much as knowing all their spelling. And then you get a sense of human worth. But I think you're right. I know in medicine now and in law, maybe social work, those kinds of things, the interview is everything. It's aptitude. Aptitude and personal capacity. Heaven knows we need doctors who have a fantastic bedside manner, and don't we?
Absolutely. Jeannie, tell me more about, in your classrooms at your school that you set up, you have this idea of only 2 outcomes for a student.
We had four.
Okay.
But the 2 that we used mostly was getting there, which was really delightful, because even if you're just learning to, do a letter shape and you just put the pen on the paper, you're getting there. But when you really accomplished something and mastered something, we would say you've nailed it. And I don't know, I think your staff yesterday were not terribly familiar with that idea, but I think it's a lovely expression. It's like there's all sorts of things floating around and you just go, bang, I've got that. And I think what's beautiful about that is that you've nailed it. So your teacher hasn't done the work for you, your parents haven't done it, you have nailed it. And the sense of a satisfaction, and it can be anything at all, and then the getting there, the nearly there. The other one was keep trying, you're nearly there. The belief was that you couldn't fail because, you're trying, you're nearly there and you've nailed it. And if you didn't nail it, when other kids did, well, you're nearly there. And so, and again, we had pushback with the parents who said, but where is she in the maths class? And I'd say, she's nailing it. And what does that mean? And then when they were really cross, they'd say, but where is she in the class? How is she? No. How successful is she in maths? And I would say, ask your child. Ask your child how successful. And, that's wonderful. Oh, yeah, I had fun today because we did such and such. That's a measure of the progress. So, as we were saying in days of yore, you'd have streaming, you'd have the smart kids, and then you'd have I used to call them the great unwashed in the middle, and then you'd have, what did they call them? Nuff-nuffers or something, terrible terms for kids that, were just unacceptable, really. So that is not good education. So the thing too, Shannon, that I like about our formula was, instead of having the bright students and the average students and the, struggling students or whatever you want to call them, the philosophy in my school was that you might be really good at throwing a ball, nailed it, but you might be having trouble with your letter formation. So that the kids that were doing the letters might be struggling to throw the ball. And so again, you get this sense of the diversity of not only a range of strengths, but a time sequencing that, I have never learnt to throw a ball because when I was at school, nice young girls didn't throw a ball. Mm-hmm. I've no idea all my grandchildren can throw a ball, but I'm good at other things. So the thing about the nailing it, it's only in a very finite area at a moment in time, which I think is a joy, really, because then you can take risks and branch out into other areas. I've never nailed cooking myself, but and that's okay. You don't have to be perfect. So that's the philosophy behind it.
So I've got one last question for you.
Yes, Rishi.
How would you describe a happy classroom? What makes it fun?
Well, I think again, going back to the research, it's a teacher being authentic, and the kids. It's quite complex because obviously as a responsible professional, there has to be a professional distance so that you're always in control and the children are children. But the degree to which you can reveal your own vulnerabilities and be like them. So I think a fun classroom is where the students can actually make fun of the teacher or play a game, or the security and the capacity to learn comes from the teacher's genuine personality and vulnerabilities and weaknesses being evident to the children because it gives them permission to be vulnerable. it's a very hard thing to do. When I was really at my best, sometimes I would walk in and I'd say to a year 12 class, oh, let's not do anything today. Let's go and lie on the grass. And then I'd say, what are you seeing? Write a poem about the blades of grass. And, you know, every child would write a magnificent poem. Or I'd say to the big boys at a boys' school, oh, we've got to go to the school formal tonight. What should I wear? Do you think I should wear my blue long dress or should I wear a bright yellow short one? And these are 17-year-old boys, and they'd go, oh, really? And they'd say, what should you, oh, I think you should wear the navy. Yeah. But that sense of we're all in this together, and I might have all the qualifications and all the examining capacities, but I still want them to see me as a person. And one boy said once, Dr. Shaw, you're looking a bit tired. I think you should put your lippy on. How beautiful, gorgeous. And I did, and I was tired, but how beautiful. And I said, you're going to be a good husband. You know, you get all this stuff. But it is to do with vulnerability mixed with control, mixed with confidence, mixed with professionalism. But I think it comes back to that idea of if you're having fun, then you're modelling. I think what you have to model is that you're very smart and you've learnt a lot and you know a lot and you're highly qualified, but you can be really silly because that's sort of how we are. We're vulnerable and we're clever. Yeah. We're worried, but we're okay. That's being able to show your vulnerability is such a relief too, you know.
So not taking yourself too seriously with the children.
No. And being, I think, vulnerable. Sometimes if I was very tired, I'd tell the students something quite sophisticated, quite intellectual, and then they'd say, could you say that again? And I'd say, no, I have no idea what I just said. And they'd laugh. And I'd say, your job is to listen the first time because it's gone out of my head. But that kind of thing is very powerful, I think. The authenticity around teaching is what the kids remember.
I wish you were my teacher. I think every listener, you know, is probably feeling the same way. But thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and being such an encourager as well to us. Ever since you've come, you've just had such kind words, and that actually the fact that you believe in what we're doing and you've been there before gives us a lot of
you must keep going.
Yeah.
And if I may say, just in conclusion, all I was interested in at your school is looking at the faces of the children. One little boy came up and said hi, and they look happy, they look valued. And I assume their learning is top notch. So you're doing much better than the old-fashioned school, I think.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you very much,
done.
Jeannie.
That's a pleasure.